Welcome to Toku-Terror, the series where we dive into the darker, creepier side of tokusatsu. Last time I took a look at the Japanese film, The Invisible Man Appears, Daiei Pictures' take on the H.G. Wells character, the Invisible Man. If you saw that review, then you know I thought the movie was just alright. The effects were pretty solid for 1949, but the plot was kind of all over the place. It's basically about some criminals using an invisible man to steal a necklace, which felt very underwhelming for the concept. 5 years later, Toho Studios would take a shot at their own version of the Invisible Man with a new project proposed by Takeo Kita, a production designer at the studio who would later go on to contribute to numerous Godzilla and Kaiju films. At the time, the first Godzilla movie was about to hit theaters across Japan, and apparently Toho was already looking to make another special effects driven film right after it. However, unlike Godzilla, Toho's Invisible Man was more of a B picture made on a tight low budget. So with that in mind, how is the movie overall? Well, let's dive in and find out. The story opens with a man accidentally running over someone with his car. But to his shock, the victim turns out to be an invisible man, who dies on the spot and turns visible. Well, that was a short movie. Fun fact, the invisible man who gets hit by the car here is played by Haruo Nakajima, the same suit actor who would portray Godzilla in his first few movies. It's nice to actually see his face on screen, even if it's in a less than flattering role. Anyway, it turns out that this invisible man was one of many ordinary people who were made invisible during World War II to work as secret agents for the Japanese army. Most of them were believed to have died during the conflict, but a note found on the invisible man who was run over says that at least one more is still alive and hiding among society. The news spreads quickly, and soon a group of men begin taking advantage of the legend, conducting heists under the name the Invisible Men. One of the mobsters even wears the traditional Invisible Man getup, but none of them are the real deal. The actual Invisible Man is a guy named Takamitsu Nanjo, who is just an ordinary man in clown makeup trying to make a living as a street advertiser for a cabaret. But here's the twist. The people pretending to be the Invisible Men are actually the ones running the cabaret, something Nanjo doesn't realize at first. In the beginning, Nanjo doesn't seem that interested in clearing his name, but everything changes when the crooks kill the grandfather of a blind girl, Nanjo's neighbor and only real friend. Determined to make things right, he sets out to stop the criminals and avenge her grandfather. Oh, and there's also some sappy forced romance sprinkled into the plot between Nanjo and one of the cabaret singers. Meanwhile, a reporter is playing detective and figures out that Nanjo is the Invisible Man, but instead of turning him in, he decides to team up with him and take down the crooks. Calling this movie anything but convoluted would be generous. It has plenty of problems, and sadly the negatives outweigh the positives. The production was insanely rushed. To put it in perspective, it got greenlit on October 25th, 1954, and hit theaters by December 29th. That's less than 2 months, which is wild for any film, especially a special effects heavy sci-fi flick. Speaking of effects, Eiji Tsuburaya, fresh off Godzilla, handled them from here. He used composite photography and practical camera tricks to make all the invisible effects convincing, for the most part. I mentioned in my review of The Invisible Man Appears, which Tsuburaya also worked on, that his work on that film was on par with Universal's movies. In fact, he even reuses some of those tricks for this movie. By this point, invisibility effects were well within his wheelhouse, but the rushed schedule meant fewer elaborate sequences this time around. The film was directed by Motoyoshi Oda, who would go on to direct Godzilla Raids Again not long after this. That movie also had a notorious tight production schedule, but it's no surprise when you realize that Oda was often handed rushed B productions like this one. Anyway, the film's highlight moment comes when Nanjo fully reveals to the reporter, as well as the audience, that he is the Invisible Man. Throughout the film, Nanjo wears clown makeup to keep himself visible, and even walks the streets in this disguise. When he finally removes the makeup, the effect is incredible. The illusion was achieved by having the actor rub black grease paint on his face, which when combined with a separately filmed background, made the dark areas appear transparent. I wouldn't say it's better than what came before, but it's definitely a more unique approach. What's odd though is that even when Nanjo is fully painted up like a clown, you can still see his eyes and mouth. Unless he also painted over those, which sounds really painful just to imagine, it doesn't really make sense. The dark eyewear in traditional Invisible Man designs was there to cover exactly that. I get this variation is trying to do something different, but it ends up feeling like more of an obvious oversight than a creative choice. Everything else is pretty much what you'd expect from an Invisible Man film at the time. You've got levitating objects, shadow boxing, and shoe prints appearing out of nowhere, which doesn't really make a lot of sense since the Invisible Man himself should be invisible, not the things he's wearing, but this was something even the other movies messed up on. Now, Nanjo's character isn't really all that compelling. He's a surface level nice guy, but there's little beyond that. Now, we do get some backstory, but it's handed to us in these clunky exposition dumps. The idea of living everyday life without a visible appearance could make for a fascinating character study. Unfortunately, the story doesn't seem interested in exploring that route. The other characters like Mariko the blind girl, Michio the singer, and Komatsu the reporter are all really strong supporting characters, and their relationships with Nanjo are genuinely compelling. I just wish the film gave us more meaningful moments between them. The villain's story with the Invisible Men is very one-sided, featuring subpar antagonists. The story presents a group of invisible men, yet it never actually proves that any of them are truly invisible. They're just shown robbing places with their faces covered, which really isn't that much different from your typical ski mask wearing bank robber. The final act, however, is really fun, with Nanjo messing around with the thieves with musical instruments. It's a bit out of character, but I'll take it. The showdown with the main villain at the oil refinery is pretty lackluster. It's mostly just the guy shadowboxing by himself. The oil rig in the background catching fire is a neat visual though. Given how close this movie was to Godzilla's production, that shot might have reused leftover miniatures, but that's total speculation on my part. I get that this was a rushed, low-budget production, and it really shows. When I reviewed The Invisible Man Appears a year ago, I wasn't such a huge fan of that movie either. But despite its flaws, it's a more entertaining movie than this is. It actually does more with the Invisible Man concept, whereas this movie I feel doesn't utilize that concept to its best potential. Overall, Toho's Invisible Man movie is just okay. If you're a big fan of the Universal Invisible Man movies, you might end up feeling disappointed with this one, as it's really nothing like those. The film seems like it wants to explore deeper themes about post-war Japan, but it never fully commits to that either, and instead ends up feeling like a very mediocre crime drama with an Invisible Man just thrown in there. I've got one more Japanese Invisible Man movie to cover for next year's Toku-Terror, and I've heard it's the best of the three, so hopefully I've got something good to look forward to. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will see you all next time.